So we can just start.
Yeah.
Okay, and my presentation was all about differentiation and challenge, which has followed a really traditional approach for as long as I've been a teacher, really. But this is about looking at it a bit differently, because some of the traditional differentiation that we've used, which is really about putting children into groups and giving them slightly different work depending on their ability, can, with all the best intentions, sometimes cap the potential of those children. If I'm giving children who have consistently shown they've got less knowledge, less skill, less practice with something, if I then give them less, I'm going to keep that cycle going and they're never going to catch up. So really it's about taking a different approach to differentiation and creating learning opportunities where everybody has the ability and the potential to take it as far as they can go. So some of the main techniques we looked at were activities that we call low threshold, high ceiling, or have a kind of slope of difficulty. So a simple task that everybody can access, and in the session we used a maths example, but then by the questions that I ask, I can take children further along that slope of difficulty, and ultimately, usually further than they would go with the differentiated task that I might have planned. So for example, in the session we were looking for some numbers that fulfilled a certain criteria, and I started asking if people could find one example, which we did eventually, and then from that one example we were able to find something else, and then I asked them to spot a pattern with the numbers, and somebody noticed a pattern. Then I asked them to apply that pattern to see if they could find any more numbers that matched the criteria, and they could. And then I said, well, what if I told you there was actually one in between these numbers, or there was actually one here? And suddenly the thinking and the learning went a lot deeper, and people suddenly realized there was actually infinite answers to this problem. They started generalizing, they started looking at it in a much more abstract way. And so the learning just got deeper and deeper and more rich as they went along. And everybody got to a point that they maybe wouldn't have predicted they would get to at the beginning. And so as teachers, having that little bank of certain types of questions, which are based on kind of Bloom's taxonomy and those things I learnt about when I was a trainee teacher, kind of what if, looking for a pattern, can you create your own example of this? Rather than the kind of what, who, when kind of basic questions that we can sometimes get stuck in with our learning. So that was the real, the main theme of the session. We did some dancing together, and we started talking about where we were along our learning journey, because there's lots of work about the science of learning entering education now. So things to do with growth mindsets, learning stages, and so engaging children in how to learn and learning how to learn and the learning stages is much more powerful than simply getting children to talk about how good are you at this, can you do this or not, because children often or can see things as very black and white. I'm good at maths, I'm bad at maths. I'm good at English, I'm bad at English. Actually, if you're talking about where are you along your learning journey with this part of maths, is a much more powerful way of doing that. The most important thing we talked about, which sounds like really quite a minor thing, but really I think is incredibly powerful, is sometimes as teachers we teach to the middle. We have a middle group of middle ability children, and we kind of set our teaching there, and then we give something a little bit harder to our higher ability children, a little bit easier to our lower ability children. And that ultimately can really cap the learning of those children. So the main message was to shift that middle ground to the top, to teach to the top. Think, what is it I want every child to be able to achieve? And once I've decided that, the question I have to ask myself is, what do some of the other children need to get there? They'll be able to do this if maybe I give them some equipment to have on their table. Maybe I give them some things on the wall that they can look at as reminders. Maybe I give them something to stick in their book that they can refer to. or a mat on their table, whatever it might be, simply just explaining it once verbally before they do it on paper. That will ultimately close the gap rather than keep this gap from your low abilities to the high ability widening over time. So teach to the top and support where necessary was really the main idea behind what I was talking about. Well, one of the keys to observing children and adapting the learning to specific children in your class is to give them time. Sometimes as teachers we feel we need to be teaching and helping all of the time, and actually standing back and seeing what children do independently is really, really important. So in the task we did during the session, for example, we were trying to solve a maths problem. And as I walked around the group, I could see that people had approached it in lots of different ways. And that's because I hadn't told them how I wanted them to approach it. And that gave me an opportunity as a teacher to stop them after 5, 6, 7 minutes and just highlight some of the different approaches that were being used around the room. So I could hold up somebody's work and say, look how this person has laid it out as I had and is trying lots of different things in these boxes. Somebody else was working much more abstractly, just using things like algebra. Someone else had done something completely different. And other children can learn from the approaches that children in their class make, and they will observe things amongst their peers that they wouldn't have thought of themselves. So my job as a teacher was just to give some time, give some space, give an open-ended task, and then showcase the different approaches that children had taken. And maybe next time some of those children will borrow an idea from their peers. And again, not coming from me, but coming from sharing ideas, they've got another method that they can use.